The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept wrapping my fingers around the ceramic mug anyway, seeking some anchor in the physical world while my mind spiraled into territories I'd never wanted to explore. It was 3:17 a.m. and I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by philosophy books I'd pulled from my shelves in a desperate attempt to find someone. Anyone who could explain why I felt like I was drowning in existence itself. The question had started simple enough. What's the point?
Oh, timekeeper, ease my load. My regrets are cutting deep. Please, timekeeper, ease my load. My regrets are cutting deep. These old mistakes keep haunting me, stealing breath from every dream I keep. Don't let my past chain my weary feet. Don't let my failures burn in this heat. Please, clock winder, turn my sorrow to the light.
It began 3 weeks earlier when my grandmother died. Not suddenly, not tragically, just the slow, inevitable fade of a body that had carried a soul for 87 years. I'd sat beside her hospital bed, watching the monitors trace the steady rhythm of a heart that would soon stop, and I'd asked her what she thought came next. "Nothing, sweetheart," she'd whispered, her voice paper-thin but startlingly clear. "Nothing at all, and that's okay." I'd expected some comforting platitude about heaven or peace, or seeing her husband again. Instead, she'd handed me the most terrifying gift imaginable. Honesty. The machines beeped their digital liturgy, and my grandmother closed her eyes for the last time with the serene acceptance of someone who had long ago made peace with the void. But I couldn't make peace with it. That night, standing in my kitchen, making dinner for one, I felt the question bloom like a tumor in my chest. If nothing comes after, if this is all there is, if every person I love will die, and every word I write will be forgotten, and every star will burn out, then what's the point of any of it? The question followed me everywhere. To work, where I pushed papers that would push other papers that would eventually end up in filing cabinets that would be thrown away when the company inevitably folded. To dinner with friends, where we discussed our hopes and dreams and 5-year plans, as if they were sacred scriptures instead of elaborate ways to convince ourselves that temporary meanings could somehow become permanent.
Each wrong I carry, a debt unpaid. Please, please keep her. Free my soul from yesterday. I'm crawling through, begging to the timekeeper.
to my apartment, where I stared at the paintings on my walls, my own paintings, and wondered why I'd bothered to create anything at all. That's how I ended up on my floor at 3 a.m., surrounded by Camus and Sartre and Kierkegaard, searching for someone who had walked this path before me and emerged with their sanity intact. The books felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the accumulated despair of brilliant minds who had stared into the same abyss that was now staring back at me. I opened The Myth of Sisyphus and read Camus' opening lines. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. My hands trembled as I set the book down. Here was someone who understood. Here was someone who had felt the crushing weight of meaninglessness and had somehow found a way to articulate it without being destroyed by it. I felt less alone in that moment than I had in weeks, which was strange because Camus was describing the most isolating experience imaginable, the recognition that we are fundamentally alone in a universe that doesn't care whether we live or die. I thought about my grandmother's final words, about the casual way she dismissed the possibility of an afterlife, and I realized she hadn't just been talking about death, she'd been talking about life, about the courage it takes to continue existing when you know that existence itself is arbitrary, temporary, and ultimately insignificant. The absurd, Camus called it. The contradiction between our desperate need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. It wasn't just a philosophical concept, it was the lived reality of every conscious being who had ever looked up at the stars and felt both wonder and terror at their own cosmic insignificance. I spent the rest of that night reading, and by dawn I understood that I stood at a crossroads. I could choose to end the contradiction by ending myself. I could choose to leap into faith, convincing myself that meaning existed somewhere beyond my comprehension, or I could choose the third path, the one that would define the rest of my life. I could choose to revolt. The landscape of meaninglessness. To understand revolt, we must first understand the territory it conquers. The absurd is not merely an abstract philosophical concept, it is the lived experience of consciousness confronting its own limitations. It emerges when our fundamental human need for clarity, unity, and meaning collides with the world's silence, fragmentation, and indifference.
Look in the mirror, don't like what I see. Been running from the man I'm supposed to be. Made too many mistakes, hurt too many hearts. Time to tear this old me apart. I wanna be a better man, clean up my life the best I can. Leave behind these broken ways.
Consider the trajectory of human meaning-making throughout history. For millennia, we constructed elaborate frameworks to explain our existence, gods who loved us, destinies that awaited us, purposes that justified our struggles. These frameworks provided what the psychologist Viktor Frankl called will to meaning, the driving force that allowed humans to endure suffering because they believed it served some greater purpose. But the modern era systematically dismantled these frameworks. Science revealed a universe governed by physical laws rather than divine will. Psychology demonstrated that our deepest convictions often stemmed from unconscious drives rather than rational choice. Sociology showed that our most cherished values were cultural constructions rather than universal truths. One by one, the traditional sources of meaning crumbled under the weight of human inquiry.
Lord, give me strength to change my soul. Help me find the self-control to be the man my mama raised, not the one who lost his way.
This process of disenchantment, as Max Weber termed it, left us in an unprecedented position. We became perhaps the first generation in human history to possess both the cognitive capacity to ask ultimate questions and the knowledge to recognize that those questions might have no answers. We inherited the anxiety of consciousness without the comfort of predetermined meaning. The absurd manifests differently for each individual, but its essential structure remains constant. It arises when our reason encounters the unreasonable, when our longing for purpose meets purposelessness, when our mortality confronts the eternal indifference of existence. It is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be acknowledged, the human condition in its purest form. Albert Camus identified this condition through his own lived experience. Born into poverty in French Algeria, he witnessed firsthand the arbitrary nature of suffering and privilege. His father died in World War I when Camus was barely a year old, not for any grand cause, but as a statistic in humanity's endless capacity for meaningless violence. His mother worked as a cleaning woman, deaf and nearly mute, struggling to survive in a world that seemed indifferent to her existence. These early experiences shaped Camus' understanding of the absurd, not as an abstract philosophical problem, but as a concrete reality. He saw that human beings could be crushed by circumstances entirely beyond their control, that suffering was distributed randomly rather than according to any moral calculus, and that death came without regard for whether a life had achieved its purpose. Yet Camus also recognized something else, that humans possessed an extraordinary capacity to continue living and even flourishing in the face of this recognition. His mother, despite her limitations and hardships, maintained a dignity and grace that inspired his lifelong commitment to human solidarity. She lived without grand illusions about the meaning of existence, yet she lived fully and authentically. This observation led Camus to his central insight. The absurd is not a reason for despair, but a starting point for authenticity. When we strip away the comforting illusions about cosmic purpose, we are left with something irreducibly valuable, our capacity to choose how we respond to existence. The absurd hero, in Camus' formulation, is not someone who has found a way to escape the human condition, but someone who has learned to embrace it fully. They recognize that life is temporary, that suffering is inevitable, and that the universe offers no guarantees about the significance of human action. Yet they choose to live anyway, not because they have found a reason to live, but because living itself becomes an act of defiance against the void. This defiance is not bitter or resentful, but joyful and affirming. It springs from the recognition that if existence has no predetermined meaning, then we are free to create meaning through our choices and actions. If there is no cosmic purpose, then every moment becomes precious precisely because it is fleeting. If we are truly alone in the universe, then our capacity for love, creativity, and solidarity becomes all the more remarkable. The absurd hero lives in full consciousness of mortality while refusing to be paralyzed by it. They understand that their achievements will not last forever while continuing to strive for excellence. They know that their relationships will end in separation while loving deeply anyway. They recognize that their society is imperfect while working to improve it. This is not a philosophical position that can be adopted through intellectual argument alone. It must be lived, practiced, and renewed each day through the countless small choices that constitute a human life. It requires what Camus called lucid indifference, a clear-eyed acceptance of existence combined with a passionate commitment to living it fully. The journey to this acceptance is neither quick nor easy. Most of us cycle through various forms of what Camus termed philosophical suicide, attempts to escape the absurd rather than embrace it. We seek salvation in religion, ideology, romantic love, professional achievement, or various forms of escapism. Each of these strategies provides temporary relief from the anxiety of existence, but ultimately they fail because they require us to deny fundamental aspects of the human condition. The existentialist temptation. Before examining the path of revolt, we must understand why it is necessary, why the seemingly more optimistic existentialist approach ultimately proves insufficient. Existentialism, particularly as developed by Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, offers an appealing alternative to both traditional religion and nihilistic despair. It suggests that while existence may precede essence, while we may be born without predetermined purpose, we can create meaning through our choices and commitments. The existentialist proposition is seductive because it preserves human agency while acknowledging cosmic meaninglessness. It suggests that we can be the authors of our own significance, that authentic living consists in choosing our values and pursuing them with full awareness of their contingency. This approach seems to offer the best of both worlds, intellectual honesty about the nature of existence combined with practical guidance for how to live. Yet Camus identified a fundamental flaw in this reasoning. The existentialist solution, he argued, represents a subtle form of philosophical suicide because it requires us to make a leap from the recognition of meaninglessness to the assertion of meaning. It asks us to believe that our capacity to choose values somehow makes those values objectively significant, that our commitment to projects gives those projects genuine importance beyond our subjective experience. This leap becomes problematic when we examine its psychological and practical implications. If meaning depends entirely on our subjective commitment, then it becomes fragile and contingent in ways that undermine its effectiveness. We know at some level that our chosen purposes are arbitrary, that we could have chosen differently, that others choose differently, that our commitments may change over time. This knowledge creates a persistent anxiety about the authenticity of our choices and the stability of our self-created meanings. Consider the experience of someone who has built their identity around professional achievement. They may choose to find meaning in their career, dedicating themselves fully to excellence in their field. This commitment can provide years or even decades of purposeful living. But what happens when they retire, or when their industry becomes obsolete, or when they realize that their work has not produced the satisfaction they expected? The meaning they created proves as fragile as any externally imposed meaning. The same pattern repeats across all forms of self-created significance. Romantic love can provide profound meaning until it ends in betrayal or death. Artistic creation can sustain a sense of purpose until the artist questions whether their work truly matters. Political engagement can offer a sense of mission until the movement fails or reveals its own contradictions. Even the commitment to family can become a source of anxiety when we recognize that our children will face the same existential challenges we have faced. The deeper problem with existentialist meaning creation is that it remains trapped within the framework of seeking meaning. It accepts the premise that life must have significance to be worth living, then attempts to manufacture that significance through human will and commitment, but this approach fails to question whether the need for meaning itself might be the source of our suffering. Camus recognized that the demand for meaning is itself an arbitrary human desire. We are the only species that seems to require cosmic significance to feel comfortable with existence. Other animals live without apparent anxiety about the purpose of their lives. They exist, they survive, they reproduce, they die, and they seem to do so without the existential angst that characterizes human consciousness. Our demand for meaning, Camus suggested, might be better understood as a kind of cognitive imperialism, an attempt to impose human categories on a universe that operates according to different principles. When we insist that existence must be meaningful, we are like travelers who visit a foreign country and complain that the locals don't speak our language. The problem is not with the country, but with our expectations. This insight leads to a radical reorientation. Instead of asking how we can create meaning in a meaningless universe, we might ask whether we can learn to live without meaning, whether we can find value in existence itself, rather than in some purpose that existence might serve. This shift moves us from the anxiety of meaning creation to the freedom of meaning abandonment. The existentialist hero remains burdened by the need to justify their existence through their choices. They must constantly be vigilant about authenticity, always examining whether their commitments are genuine or merely forms of bad faith. They live under the pressure of creating themselves while knowing that their self-creation is ultimately arbitrary. The absurd hero, by contrast, is liberated from this burden. They recognize that no amount of commitment or authenticity can make their existence objectively significant. This recognition, rather than leading to despair, becomes a source of profound freedom. If nothing they do ultimately matters in cosmic terms, then they are free to act according to their immediate experience of value rather than according to some abstract conception of significance. This freedom manifests as what Camus called revolt, not angry rebellion against existence, but joyful defiance of the demand for meaning. The absurd hero lives fully while acknowledging the temporary and contingent nature of all human values. They love without believing that love conquers all. They create without believing that their creations will endure. They struggle for justice without believing that justice is cosmically guaranteed. This approach requires a fundamental shift in how we understand value and significance. Rather than seeking permanent, objective meaning, we learn to appreciate temporary, subjective experience. Rather than demanding that life serve some greater purpose, we find purpose in the immediate experience of living. Rather than trying to escape the human condition, we embrace it as the only condition we have ever known. The failure of meaning. To fully appreciate the necessity of revolt, we must examine more closely how various forms of meaning creation inevitably fail when subjected to the clear light of conscious examination. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable, but it is not infinite. Eventually, every constructed meaning reveals its arbitrary nature, and we are forced to confront the absurd once again. Religious meaning, perhaps the most enduring form of human significance creation, provides the clearest example of this pattern. For centuries, religious frameworks offered comprehensive answers to existential questions. They explained why we exist, what we should do, and what awaits us after death. They provided not just meaning but certainty. The the comforting assurance that existence operates according to a divine plan that, while mysterious, is ultimately benevolent and just. Yet religious meaning depends on faith, on the willingness to believe without adequate evidence, or sometimes despite contrary evidence. In an age of scientific literacy, this willingness becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. We know too much about the natural processes that govern existence to easily accept supernatural explanations. We have seen too much arbitrary suffering to believe in cosmic justice. We understand too much about the psychological origins of religious experience to treat it as unambiguous revelation. Even for those who maintain religious faith, the experience of meaning often proves fragile. The believer may suffer a crisis when prayers go unanswered, when innocent people suffer, or when they are exposed to compelling alternative explanations for existence. The very fact that faith requires constant reinforcement suggests its inherent instability. If religious meaning were truly secure, it would not need to be defended so vigorously against doubt. Secular ideologies offer a similar pattern. Political movements, for instance, can provide powerful sources of meaning for their adherents. The commitment to justice, equality, or freedom can sustain decades of purposeful activity. The believer in political change can endure hardship and sacrifice because they believe their suffering serves a greater cause. Yet political meanings, like religious ones, prove vulnerable to disillusionment. Movements fail, leaders prove corrupt, revolutions consume their own children. The complexity of social change resists the simple narratives that sustain political commitment. The progressive discovers that their preferred policies have unintended consequences. The conservative realizes that tradition cannot provide guidance for unprecedented challenges. The revolutionary learns that changing systems is easier than changing human nature. Personal relationships offer another arena where meaning creation commonly occurs and commonly fails. Romantic love, in particular, serves as a frequent source of existential significance. The beloved becomes the reason for living, the relationship becomes the primary source of value, and the lover's identity becomes fundamentally dependent on the continuation of the romance. This approach to meaning creation through love inevitably produces anxiety and instability. The lover becomes dependent on another person's feelings and choices for their sense of worth and purpose. They must constantly monitor the relationship for signs of decline. They must suppress aspects of themselves that might threaten the connection. They must live with the knowledge that love can end through death, betrayal, or simple change of heart. Even successful, long-term relationships cannot bear the weight of providing total existential meaning. The demand that another person serve as the complete justification for one's existence places an impossible burden on both partners. It transforms love from a free gift into a desperate necessity, destroying the very spontaneity and joy that make relationships valuable. Professional achievement represents yet another common source of meaning that proves ultimately inadequate. The dedicated professional, whether artist, scientist, entrepreneur, or public servant, may find profound satisfaction in their work. They may believe that their contributions matter, that their skills serve important purposes, that their career provides a worthy focus for their energies. Yet professional meaning remains vulnerable to multiple forms of disruption. Industries change, making previously valuable skills obsolete. Organizations fail, destroying years of careful work. Personal interests evolve, revealing that career satisfaction was temporary rather than permanent. Health problems force retirement before planned. Economic necessity requires shifts to less meaningful work. More fundamentally, the pursuit of professional meaning often requires us to ignore the broader context within which our work occurs. The scientist may believe they are advancing human knowledge while remaining aware that their research may be used for destructive purposes. The artist may believe they are creating beauty while knowing that their work will likely be forgotten. The entrepreneur may believe they are solving important problems while recognizing that their solutions create new problems. Even the most apparently meaningful forms of human activity, caring for family, helping others, creating beauty, prove fragile under sustained examination. Parents discover that their children grow up to make choices they cannot approve. Helpers realize that their assistance sometimes enables rather than alleviates suffering. Artists recognize that their creations may inspire or corrupt with equal facility. The pattern repeats endlessly because all forms of meaning creation share a common flaw. They attempt to extract permanent significance from temporary circumstances. They ask finite human beings to find infinite purpose in finite activities. They demand that contingent choices provide necessary justification for existence. This is not to say that relationships, work, art, and service are worthless. On the contrary, they represent some of the most valuable aspects of human experience. The problem arises when we burden them with the additional requirement that they provide existential meaning, that they answer the question of why life is worth living. When we recognize the inevitable failure of meaning creation, we face a choice. We can respond with despair, concluding that if nothing provides lasting significance, then nothing has any value. We can respond with denial, clinging more desperately to meanings we know to be fragile. We can respond with cynicism, adopting a pose of superior detachment from all human commitments. Or we can respond with revolt, the recognition that the failure of meaning creation does not diminish the value of existence, but liberates us to experience that value more directly and authentically. This response requires us to abandon the demand for cosmic significance while embracing the immediate reality of human experience. The nature of revolt. Revolt, as Camus conceived it, is not the angry rejection of existence, but its passionate affirmation in the face of ultimate meaninglessness. It is the conscious choice to live fully while maintaining clear awareness of mortality, contingency, and cosmic indifference. It represents neither optimism nor pessimism, but lucid recognition of the human condition combined with wholehearted engagement with that condition. To understand revolt properly, we must distinguish it from rebellion, resentment, and resignation, responses that might superficially resemble it but operate from fundamentally different principles. Rebellion seeks to overthrow the conditions that create suffering, often through political or social action. While rebellion can be valuable in addressing specific injustices, it becomes problematic when it extends to rebellion against existence itself, when it demands that reality conform to human preferences rather than accepting reality as the starting point for human action. Resentment, similarly, focuses on the gap between what is and what we believe should be. The resentful person nurses grievances against life for failing to provide the security, meaning, or satisfaction they believe they deserve. Resentment is always backward-looking, concerned with what has been denied rather than what remains possible. Resignation accepts the limitations of existence but does so passively, withdrawing energy and commitment from human activities. The resigned person may acknowledge that life lacks ultimate meaning, but they respond by reducing their engagement with life rather than intensifying it. Revolt differs from all these responses because it neither seeks to change the fundamental conditions of existence nor withdraws from engagement with those conditions. Instead, it embraces existence precisely as it is, temporary, uncertain, and ultimately insignificant in cosmic terms, while maintaining full commitment to the experience of living. This paradoxical stance requires what might be called metaphysical courage, the willingness to affirm life without guarantees about its meaning or outcome. The person in revolt lives as if their choices matter while knowing that they may not matter in any ultimate sense. They love as if love were eternal while knowing that all relationships end. They create as if their work will endure while accepting that everything human is transient. This is not cognitive dissonance but conscious paradox. The person in revolt does not ignore the tension between engagement and meaninglessness. They live within that tension as the defining characteristic of human existence. They neither resolve the paradox through denial nor are paralyzed by it through despair. Instead, they draw energy from the very impossibility of their situation. Consider the example of Sisyphus, the mythological figure whom Camus adopted as the archetypal absurd hero, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he nears the summit. Sisyphus faces the purest possible expression of meaningless effort. His task serves no purpose, accomplishes nothing, and will never end. Yet Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus happy, not because he has found some hidden meaning in his punishment, not because he believes his suffering serves some greater purpose, but because he has learned to find satisfaction in the activity itself. The moment of revolt comes when Sisyphus recognizes his situation fully, its futility, its eternity, its absurdity, and chooses to embrace it anyway. In that moment of recognition and acceptance, Sisyphus becomes superior to his fate. The gods intended his punishment to be a source of torment, but he has transformed it into an occasion for affirmation. He cannot change his circumstances, but he can change his relationship to those circumstances. His happiness is not dependent on achieving the summit, but on the experience of pushing the boulder. This transformation illustrates the essential nature of revolt. It finds freedom within constraint, meaning within meaninglessness, value within indifference. It does not require external validation or cosmic permission to affirm existence. It generates its own justification through the very act of living consciously and fully. The person in revolt experiences what might be called groundless joy, satisfaction that does not depend on achieving particular outcomes or receiving external confirmation of worth. This joy emerges from the simple fact of existing consciously in a universe that permits consciousness to emerge. It celebrates the remarkable accident that matter has organized itself in such a way as to become aware of itself. This groundless joy manifests in various forms throughout human experience. The artist who creates not because they believe their work will change the world, but because the act of creation itself provides satisfaction. The lover who commits to relationship not because they believe love provides ultimate meaning, but because loving represents the fullest expression of their humanity. The activist who works for justice, not because they believe injustice can be permanently eliminated, but because the struggle against injustice affirms human dignity. In each case, the activity becomes self-justifying rather than instrumentally valuable. It is pursued for its own sake rather than for the sake of some external goal. This shift from instrumental to intrinsic value represents a fundamental reorientation that characterizes the revolt against absurdity. The revolt also involves what Camus called solidarity with other human beings who face the same essential condition. Recognizing that all humans must confront mortality, uncertainty, and cosmic indifference creates a basis for connection that transcends differences in belief, culture, or circumstance. We are united not by shared answers to existential questions, but by shared experience of those questions. This solidarity does not require agreement about particular values or goals. It emerges from recognition of our common situation, the fact that we all must live without ultimate justification for our existence, that we all must make choices without certainty about their consequences, that we all must face death without knowing what, if anything, follows. From this recognition emerges a commitment to reducing unnecessary suffering and increasing opportunities for conscious, authentic living. The person in revolt does not seek to impose their particular values on others, but works to create conditions where all humans can confront existence on their own terms. This commitment is not based on abstract moral principles, but on immediate sympathy with the human condition. Seeing another person suffer unnecessarily evokes compassion, not because suffering violates some cosmic law, but because we recognize in their suffering our own vulnerability. Witnessing another person live with courage and authenticity inspires admiration, not because such living serves some higher purpose, but because it demonstrates the human capacity for dignity in the face of indifference. 6th, living the revolt. The philosophical framework of revolt must ultimately be tested against the practical requirements of daily existence. It is one thing to understand intellectually that life can be affirmed without cosmic meaning. It is quite another to sustain that affirmation through the ordinary challenges of human existence. Disappointment, loss, boredom, anxiety, physical pain, and the countless small compromises that constitute adult life. Living the revolt requires developing new habits of attention and response that align with its fundamental insights. These are not techniques for achieving happiness or success in conventional terms, but practices for maintaining consciousness and authenticity in the face of life's inherent difficulties. The first requirement is learning to live in the present tense. So much human suffering stems from our tendency to locate value in an imagined future or an idealized past. We tell ourselves that life will become meaningful when we achieve certain goals, find the right relationship, or reach some future state of fulfillment. Alternatively, we locate meaning in past achievements or relationships, viewing the present as a diminished version of what once was. The person in revolt recognizes both future and past as mental constructions that can distract from immediate experience. The future is uncertain by definition. We cannot know what will happen or how we will feel about what happens. The past is fixed and irretrievable. We cannot change what occurred or return to previous states of being. Only the present moment offers actual contact with existence. This does not mean abandoning planning or memory, both of which serve important practical functions. Rather, it means recognizing that planning and memory are current activities undertaken by a present consciousness. We plan not because the future is more important than the present, but because planning is something we can do now. We remember not because the past is more meaningful than the present, but because remembering is a current experience. Living in the present tense also means accepting the immediate reality of our circumstances rather than constantly evaluating those circumstances against some imagined alternative. Much mental suffering comes from the gap between what is happening and what we think should be happening. The person in revolt learns to start from what is actually occurring rather than from preferences about what should occur. This acceptance is not passive resignation, but active engagement with reality as it presents itself. If we are experiencing physical pain, we acknowledge the pain rather than adding mental suffering by resenting its presence. If we are facing disappointment, we feel the disappointment fully rather than compounding it with stories about how we should be protected from disappointment. The second requirement is developing comfort with uncertainty. Human beings have a strong psychological tendency to seek certainty about the future about the consequences of their choices, and about the ultimate significance of their actions. This seeking often creates more anxiety than the uncertainty itself, as we exhaust ourselves trying to predict and control outcomes that are inherently unpredictable and uncontrollable. The person in revolt learns to make decisions and take actions without guarantees about their outcomes. They choose based on their current understanding and values, while acknowledging that both their understanding and values may change. They commit to relationships and projects, while accepting that all commitments are provisional and all projects may fail. This comfort with uncertainty extends to the largest questions of existence. The person in revolt does not need to know why consciousness emerged from matter, whether free will exists, or what happens after death. They can live fully without answers to these questions, finding the mystery enriching rather than anxiety-provoking. The third requirement is cultivating appreciation for the ordinary aspects of existence that we typically take for granted. When we are seeking cosmic meaning, we often overlook the immediate pleasures and satisfactions available in daily life. We dismiss simple experiences as insufficient because they do not provide the grand significance we believe we need. The person in revolt learns to find genuine satisfaction in basic human activities, preparing and sharing food, walking in nature, engaging in conversation, creating small works of art, caring for family and friends. These activities do not need to serve some larger purpose to be valuable. Their value lies in the immediate experience they provide to conscious beings capable of appreciation. This cultivation of appreciation requires attention and practice. We must learn to notice experiences we have become habituated to ignoring. We must develop sensitivity to subtleties of sensation, emotion, and thought that we typically overlook in our focus on achieving future goals. We must remember that the capacity for appreciation is itself remarkable, that consciousness can find beauty, humor, and satisfaction in a universe that contains no inherent beauty, humor, or satisfaction. The fourth requirement is accepting responsibility for our choices, while abandoning the demand for external validation of those choices. The person in revolt recognizes that they are the author of their values and decisions without believing that this authorship makes their values and decisions objectively correct. This acceptance of responsibility is liberating because it eliminates the anxiety of seeking approval from external authorities, gods, society, nature, or future generations. We can choose our commitments based on our immediate sense of what is valuable rather than on speculation about what might be ultimately justified. At the same time, this acceptance requires humility about the scope of our responsibility. We are responsible for our choices, but not for their consequences, which depend on countless factors beyond our control. We are responsible for our values, but not for proving that our values are superior to alternative values. We are responsible for our actions, but not for ensuring that our actions produce the outcomes we prefer. The fifth requirement is maintaining what might be called ironic commitment, the ability to engage fully with people, projects, and principles while maintaining awareness of their contingency and limitations. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of living in revolt, because it requires holding seemingly contradictory attitudes simultaneously. The person in revolt can love deeply while knowing that all relationships end. They can work passionately for causes they believe in while recognizing that all causes are historically contingent. They can create art, raise children, build institutions, and pursue knowledge while acknowledging that everything human is temporary and uncertain. This ironic commitment is not cynical detachment. Cynicism maintains distance from engagement as a protection against disappointment. Ironic commitment involves full engagement despite the certainty of eventual disappointment. It finds the engagement itself valuable, regardless of its ultimate outcomes. The seventh freedom of meaninglessness. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of revolt is that the abandonment of cosmic meaning leads not to nihilistic despair, but to unprecedented freedom. When we no longer need to justify our existence in terms of some ultimate purpose, we are liberated to explore the full range of human possibility without the constraint of having to prove that our choices serve some greater good. This freedom manifests first as liberation from the anxiety of meaning-seeking. So much human energy is devoted to answering unanswerable questions. Why do I exist? What is my purpose? How should I live? What happens after death? These questions create persistent background anxiety because they demand certainty where none is available. They require us to make definitive choices about matters where definitive knowledge is impossible. The person in revolt recognizes these questions as unanswerable and therefore abandons the project of answering them. This abandonment is not resignation, but relief. It is like discovering that a test you have been anxiously preparing for has been cancelled. The energy previously devoted to seeking cosmic meaning becomes available for other purposes. This liberated energy can be directed toward immediate experience rather than abstract speculation. Instead of asking why we exist, we can explore how it feels to exist. Instead of seeking our purpose, we can experiment with different ways of living and discover which ones provide satisfaction. Instead of worrying about ultimate justification, we can focus on immediate choice. The freedom of meaninglessness also liberates us from the burden of consistency with ultimate principles. When we believe that our choices must serve some cosmic purpose, we feel pressure to maintain rigid consistency with whatever values we think that purpose requires. We cannot change our minds without feeling that we are betraying our essential nature or fundamental commitments. The person in revolt recognizes that human beings are complex, contradictory, and evolving creatures who cannot be captured by any single set of principles or purposes. They can embrace different aspects of themselves at different times without feeling that they are being inauthentic. They can change their minds about important matters without experiencing identity crisis. This flexibility extends to moral and political commitments. The person in revolt can work passionately for justice while recognizing that their conception of justice is historically contingent and personally subjective. They can oppose cruelty while acknowledging that their opposition stems from immediate sympathy rather than universal moral law. They can support particular political positions while remaining open to changing those positions if their experience or understanding evolves. The freedom of meaninglessness also liberates us from the competitive aspect of meaning-seeking. When people believe that their particular religion, ideology, or lifestyle provides ultimate meaning, they often feel compelled to prove its superiority to alternatives. This leads to the familiar pattern of defending one's choices by attacking others' choices, of seeking validation through conversion or domination. The person in revolt has no need to prove that their way of living is objectively superior to other ways. They can appreciate the values and commitments of people who choose differently without feeling threatened by those differences. They can change their own commitments without feeling that they are admitting error about ultimate questions. This tolerance is not relativistic indifference. The person in revolt can still prefer some ways of living to others and can still work to promote values they find valuable, but their preferences are based on immediate experience rather than claims about cosmic truth. They prefer honesty to dishonesty because they find honest relationships more satisfying, not because they believe honesty is cosmically mandated. Perhaps most importantly, the freedom of meaninglessness liberates us from the fear of death that underlies so much human anxiety. When we believe that our lives must serve some ultimate purpose, Death represents the ultimate failure, the permanent termination of our opportunity to achieve cosmic significance. This fear of death creates secondary fears about wasting time, making wrong choices, or failing to live up to our potential. The person in revolt recognizes death as the natural termination of consciousness rather than as cosmic failure. Death becomes not something to be feared or denied, but something to be acknowledged as the boundary that gives shape to existence. Just as a musical composition gains meaning from its beginning and end, human life gains intensity from its temporal limitations. This acceptance of mortality creates what might be called mortal urgency, not the anxiety of running out of time, but the appreciation of time's preciousness. When we know that our conscious experience is limited, each moment becomes more vivid and significant. We attend more carefully to immediate experience because we understand that it will not last forever. The freedom of meaninglessness also manifests as liberation from the need to be special or unique. Much human suffering stems from the desire to be different from others, to stand out, to achieve recognition or significance that sets us apart. This desire creates constant comparison with others and persistent dissatisfaction with our ordinary humanity. The person in revolt embraces their commonality with other humans rather than seeking to transcend it. They recognize that the desire to be special is itself a common human trait, that everyone wants to feel unique, which makes the desire for uniqueness universal rather than special. This recognition leads to a kind of democratic humility that finds dignity in shared humanity rather than individual distinction. This does not mean abandoning excellence or achievement. The person in revolt can still strive to develop their abilities and contribute to human knowledge, art, or welfare. But they do so because these activities provide immediate satisfaction rather than because they believe such activities make them cosmically significant. The ethics of revolt. Living without cosmic meaning might seem to eliminate the possibility of ethics. If nothing ultimately matters, then why should we care about right and wrong, good and evil, justice and injustice? This concern reflects a common misunderstanding about the relationship between meaning and morality. The person in revolt discovers that abandoning ultimate meaning does not eliminate ethical commitment, but transforms its foundation. Traditional ethics often depends on external authority, divine commands, natural law, universal principles, or historical necessity. These frameworks provide clear guidance about right and wrong by appealing to standards that transcend individual preference or cultural convention. They offer the comfort of moral certainty at the cost of requiring faith in claims that cannot be verified. The ethics of revolt emerges from immediate human experience rather than abstract principle. It begins with the recognition that conscious beings can suffer and flourish, that they prefer flourishing to suffering, and that their capacity for both suffering and flourishing is remarkable given the indifference of the universe to their fate. This recognition leads to what might be called experiential ethics, moral commitment based on direct contact with the reality of human experience rather than on theoretical principles about how humans should behave. The person in revolt opposes cruelty not because cruelty violates cosmic law, but because they have experienced cruelty and found it to diminish rather than enhance consciousness. Similarly, they support kindness, honesty, and justice not because these values serve some ultimate purpose, but because they create conditions where conscious beings can experience the fullness of their humanity. They value beauty not because it reflects divine truth, but because aesthetic experience represents one of the most remarkable capacities of conscious beings. This experiential foundation makes the ethics of revolt both more modest and more committed than traditional approaches. It is more modest because it makes no claims about universal moral truth or cosmic significance. It is more committed because it emerges from lived experience rather than abstract reasoning. The person in revolt cannot prove that their ethical commitments are objectively correct, but they do not need such proof. They can see directly that certain ways of treating others enhance human flourishing, while others diminish it. They can feel immediately that some actions align with their deepest sense of what conscious beings deserve, while others violate that sense. This approach to ethics is particularly relevant to the question of how we should treat those who are suffering, vulnerable, or oppressed. Traditional ethics often struggles with these questions because it must derive particular obligations from universal principles. The ethics of revolt responds more directly. We should help those who are suffering because we can recognize their suffering as real and unnecessary, because we can imagine ourselves in their situation, and because the capacity to help represents one of the most remarkable aspects of human consciousness. The person in revolt does not need to believe that justice will ultimately prevail, or that their efforts to reduce suffering will succeed in eliminating it. They can work for justice and against suffering because such work expresses their humanity, rather than because it serves some cosmic purpose. This approach extends to environmental ethics as well. The person in revolt does not need to believe that nature has intrinsic value or that humans have a cosmic responsibility to preserve the environment. They can work for environmental protection because they appreciate the beauty and complexity of natural systems, because they recognize their dependence on ecological stability, and because they feel sympathy for other conscious beings who share the planet. The ethics of revolt also addresses the question of how we should live with others who hold different values or commitments. Traditional ethics often leads to conflicts when different groups claim exclusive access to moral truth. The ethics of revolt suggests a different approach. We can work together with others who share our immediate concerns while respecting their right to ground those concerns in different ultimate beliefs. This collaboration is possible because human beings share similar experiences of suffering and flourishing regardless of their theoretical commitments. A religious person and a secular person can work together to reduce poverty, not because they agree about the cosmic significance of such work, but because they both recognize poverty as a source of unnecessary suffering. The person in revolt can even find common ground with those whose ultimate beliefs they reject. They can appreciate the beauty created by religious artists, the wisdom found in religious texts, and the compassion demonstrated by religious communities without accepting the theological claims that motivate such beauty, wisdom, and compassion. The aesthetics of existence. One of the most profound transformations that occurs in revolt is the shift from seeking meaning to appreciating beauty. When we abandon the demand that existence serves some ultimate purpose, we become more sensitive to the immediate aesthetic qualities of experience, the colors of sunset, the rhythm of conversation, the texture of emotion, the patterns of thought. This aesthetic appreciation is not superficial or decorative, but fundamental to human consciousness. The capacity to find beauty in existence represents one of the most remarkable aspects of consciousness. The ability to derive satisfaction from pattern, harmony, complexity, and surprise without requiring that these qualities serve any practical purpose. The person in revolt develops what might be called aesthetic courage, the willingness to find existence beautiful despite its tragic aspects. This is not the sentimental beauty of greeting cards or motivational posters, but the complex beauty that includes darkness, conflict, and loss as essential elements of the human condition. Consider the aesthetic appreciation of a thunderstorm. The storm serves no human purpose. It may damage property, disrupt plans, or create inconvenience. Yet consciousness can find profound satisfaction in the storm's power, complexity, and drama. This appreciation does not require us to believe that the storm exists for our benefit or that it serves some cosmic purpose. The beauty emerges from the immediate encounter between consciousness and natural phenomenon. The same aesthetic appreciation can be extended to human existence as a whole. The person in revolt learns to find beauty in the entire spectrum of human experience, not just in moments of joy, success, or harmony, but in the full complexity of conscious existence. They can appreciate the beauty of struggle, the dignity of failure, the poignancy of loss, and the courage required simply to continue existing. This aesthetic approach to existence transforms suffering from meaningless torment into tragic beauty. The person in revolt does not seek suffering or glorify it, but they can recognize that consciousness capable of suffering is also consciousness capable of the most profound forms of beauty. The capacity to experience loss implies the capacity to experience love. The ability to feel disappointed suggests the ability to hope. The aesthetic appreciation of existence also extends to other human beings. The person in revolt learns to see beauty in the full range of human types and behaviors, not just in those who conform to particular ideals, but in the entire spectrum of ways that consciousness can manifest itself. They can appreciate the beauty of the scholar's dedication, the artist's vision, the parent's love, the worker's persistence, and the rebel's defiance. This aesthetic appreciation does not require approval of all human behavior. The person in revolt can still prefer some ways of living to others, and can still work to discourage cruelty, dishonesty, or injustice. But they can recognize that even negative human behaviors represent remarkable manifestations of consciousness, that the capacity for evil implies the capacity for good, that the ability to choose poorly suggests the ability to choose well. The aesthetics of existence also involves learning to appreciate the beauty of impermanence. Traditional approaches to beauty often seek the eternal and unchanging, perfect forms that transcend temporal existence. The person in revolt learns to find beauty precisely in the temporary and changing nature of experience. The beauty of human relationships includes their temporality. The fact that love does not last forever does not diminish its beauty but enhances it. The knowledge that conversations will end makes present dialogue more precious. The recognition that youth will pass makes its energy and possibility more poignant. This appreciation of impermanence extends to human achievements as well. The person in revolt can appreciate the beauty of human creativity without needing to believe that artistic works will endure forever. They can value scientific discovery without requiring that knowledge be permanent. They can support social progress without expecting that improvement will be irreversible. The aesthetics of existence ultimately involves learning to see consciousness itself as beautiful. The mere fact that matter has organized itself in such a way as to become aware of itself, to appreciate beauty, to create meaning, and to experience love represents an extraordinary development in cosmic history. This development required no cosmic purpose to be remarkable. It is remarkable simply as a fact about the universe. The person in revolt learns to find this fact sufficient. They do not need consciousness to serve some ultimate purpose beyond itself. They can appreciate consciousness as an end in itself, as the most complex, beautiful, and interesting phenomenon they have ever encountered. X. Solidarity in absurdity. The recognition that all human beings face the same fundamental existential situation creates a basis for solidarity that transcends differences in belief, culture, nationality, or personal circumstance. This solidarity is not based on shared answers to ultimate questions, but on shared experience of those questions. It emerges from the recognition that every conscious being must confront mortality, uncertainty, and cosmic indifference. This solidarity differs fundamentally from forms of human connection based on shared identity or common purpose. Traditional forms of solidarity often depend on dividing humanity into groups, us versus them, believers versus non-believers, the enlightened versus the ignorant. These divisions create strong bonds within groups, but often lead to conflict between groups. The solidarity of absurdity is universal because it is based on the human condition itself rather than on particular responses to that condition. It recognizes that religious believers and atheists, political conservatives and progressives, members of different cultures and nationalities all face the same basic challenges of conscious existence. They all must live without ultimate certainty, make choices without complete knowledge, and face death without knowing what follows. This recognition leads to a form of compassion that is both more limited and more genuine than traditional forms of universal love. It is more limited because it does not claim that all humans are equal in some cosmic sense, or that all human choices are equally valuable. It is more genuine because it emerges from immediate recognition of shared vulnerability rather than from abstract moral principles. The person in revolt can feel genuine sympathy for someone whose values they reject because they recognize in that person's convictions the same human need for meaning and certainty that they themselves have experienced. They can appreciate the courage required to maintain faith in the face of doubt, even if they cannot share that faith. They can respect the commitment required to pursue ideals, even if they question those ideals. This solidarity extends particularly to those who are suffering, struggling, or oppressed. The person in revolt recognizes that suffering is often arbitrary, that people do not deserve their pain simply because they experience it. They understand that the distribution of fortune and misfortune follows no moral logic, and that any of us could find ourselves in circumstances we did not choose and cannot control. This recognition creates obligation not based on abstract principle, but on immediate sympathy. The person in revolt helps others not because they believe helping serves some cosmic purpose, but because they can recognize themselves in others' situations. They oppose injustice not because they believe justice is cosmically guaranteed, but because they can feel the reality of others' suffering. The solidarity of absurdity also involves recognizing the dignity of different responses to the human condition. The person in revolt understands that their own response, the embrace of absurdity, is not the only possible or valid response. They can appreciate the beauty and courage found in religious faith, even if they cannot share it. They can respect the commitment found in political movements, even if they question their ultimate goals. This appreciation does not require agreement or approval. The person in revolt can still prefer some responses to others and can still work to promote values they find valuable, but they can do so without needing to prove that their preferences are objectively correct or that alternative responses are absolutely wrong. The solidarity of absurdity becomes particularly important in times of crisis, loss, or social upheaval. When traditional sources of meaning and security are threatened, people often respond with anxiety, anger, or despair. The person in revolt can offer a different kind of support, not false reassurance about ultimate meaning, but genuine companionship in the face of uncertainty. This companionship involves being present with others in their struggles, without trying to fix or explain those struggles. It means acknowledging that life is difficult and uncertain while maintaining commitment to living fully anyway. It means offering practical help and emotional support without requiring that such help serve some larger purpose. The solidarity of absurdity also involves defending the conditions that allow conscious beings to confront existence on their own terms. This means supporting freedom of thought, expression, and association, not because these freedoms serve some ultimate good, but because they create space for the full range of human responses to existence. It means opposing totalitarian movements that claim exclusive access to truth and seek to impose their particular response to existence on everyone else. It means supporting democratic institutions that allow for peaceful conflict and compromise between different ways of understanding human existence. Most importantly, it means recognizing that the capacity for consciousness itself is precious and worthy of protection. The person in revolt values consciousness not because it serves some cosmic purpose, but because it represents the most remarkable development they have encountered in their experience of existence. 11th, the courage of finitude. Living consciously within the bounds of mortality requires a particular kind of courage, not the heroic courage of those who believe their actions serve eternal purposes, but the quiet courage of those who act fully while knowing their actions are temporary. This courage of finitude involves making commitments without guarantees, loving without security, and creating without assurance of permanence. The courage of finitude begins with accepting the reality of death, not as a distant possibility, but as the defining boundary of human existence. This acceptance is not morbid preoccupation with mortality, but clear recognition that consciousness is a temporary phenomenon that will end. This recognition transforms how we experience time and choice. When we truly accept our mortality, each moment becomes more vivid and significant. We attend more carefully to immediate experience because we understand that such experience is limited. We make choices more deliberately because we recognize that time for choosing is finite. We express love more freely because we know that opportunities for expression will not last forever. This acceptance of mortality also involves accepting the mortality of everything we care about. Our relationships will end through death or separation. Our achievements will be forgotten or superseded. Our societies will change or disappear. Our species will eventually become extinct. Even the sun will burn out and the universe will grow cold and dark. Rather than finding these recognitions depressing, the person in revolt finds them liberating. If nothing lasts forever, then nothing needs to last forever to be valuable. If everything is temporary, then we can appreciate temporary things without requiring them to be permanent. If all achievements are eventually forgotten, then we can pursue achievement for its immediate satisfaction rather than for its lasting recognition. The courage of finitude also involves accepting uncertainty about the consequences of our choices. We cannot know how our actions will affect others or how history will judge our decisions. We cannot predict which of our projects will succeed or fail. We cannot guarantee that our values will be shared by future generations. This uncertainty might seem to undermine the possibility of meaningful action, but the person in revolt discovers the opposite. When we accept that we cannot control outcomes, we are freed to focus on the quality of our actions rather than their results. We can act with integrity because we care about acting well rather than about achieving particular consequences. The courage of finitude extends to accepting the limitations of human knowledge and understanding. We cannot answer ultimate questions about existence, cannot achieve complete knowledge of reality, cannot fully understand even ourselves. Rather than finding this ignorance troubling, the person in revolt finds it appropriate to our situation as finite beings in an infinite universe. This acceptance of ignorance creates space for wonder and exploration. When we stop demanding complete understanding, we can appreciate the mystery and complexity of existence. We can explore reality with curiosity rather than anxiety. We can learn without needing to master everything we encounter. The courage of finitude also involves accepting the imperfection of human institutions and relationships. No political system will create perfect justice. No relationship will provide complete fulfillment. No society will eliminate suffering or guarantee happiness. These limitations are not flaws to be corrected, but aspects of the human condition to be acknowledged. This acceptance allows for engagement with imperfect institutions and relationships without the anxiety of perfectibility. The person in revolt can work for political improvement without believing that perfect politics is possible. They can commit to relationships without believing that perfect relationships exist. They can participate in society without believing that perfect society is achievable. Perhaps most importantly, the courage of finitude involves accepting our own imperfection and limitation. We will make mistakes, hurt others, fail to live up to our ideals, and fall short of our aspirations. We will change our minds about important matters, discover that our previous beliefs were wrong, and realize that our self-understanding was incomplete. Rather than finding these limitations shameful, the person in revolt finds them human. The capacity for error implies the capacity for learning. The ability to hurt others suggests the ability to help them. The tendency to fall short of ideals indicates the capacity to have ideals at all. This self-acceptance creates space for growth and change without the pressure of perfectibility. The person in revolt can acknowledge their mistakes without being crushed by them. They can work to improve themselves without believing that improvement will eliminate their humanity. They can accept criticism without losing their sense of worth. The courage of finitude ultimately involves finding dignity in the human condition as it actually exists, rather than as we might wish it to exist. This dignity does not depend on cosmic significance or ultimate purpose, but on the remarkable fact that consciousness has emerged from matter and learned to appreciate beauty, create meaning, and experience love. 12th, the practice of revolt. The philosophical understanding of revolt must be supported by practical approaches that help maintain clarity and commitment in the face of life's inevitable challenges. These are not techniques for achieving happiness or success, but practices for staying present to the full reality of existence, its beauty and its tragedy, its possibilities and its limitations. The first practice involves developing what might be called present moment awareness, the ability to attend fully to immediate experience without the distraction of past regrets or future anxieties. This practice does not require meditation or special training, but simply the cultivation of attention to what is actually happening in each moment. Present moment awareness begins with physical sensation, noticing the feeling of breath, the pressure of feet on ground, the temperature of air on skin. These sensations provide anchoring points for consciousness, ways of returning attention to immediate reality when it becomes lost in mental constructions about meaning or purpose. This awareness extends to emotional experience, learning to feel emotions fully without immediately trying to change, analyze, or escape them. The person in revolt learns to experience sadness without believing they should be happy, to feel anxiety without believing they should be calm, to experience anger without believing they should be peaceful. This direct experience of emotion reveals something important about the nature of consciousness. It is capable of feeling without requiring that feelings serve any purpose beyond themselves. The ability to experience the full range of human emotion represents one of the most remarkable capacities of conscious beings. Present moment awareness also involves attending to the immediate environment, noticing colors, sounds, textures, and patterns that are constantly available but often overlooked. This attention reveals the extraordinary richness of ordinary experience and helps develop appreciation for the simple fact of existing in a world capable of producing such complexity and beauty. The second practice involves what might be called acceptance without resignation, the ability to acknowledge reality as it is while maintaining full engagement with the possibilities it offers. This practice requires distinguishing between what can be changed and what cannot be changed, then directing energy toward what can be influenced while accepting what cannot be controlled. This acceptance applies first to our own limitations and circumstances. The person in revolt learns to work with their actual abilities rather than the abilities they wish they had. They accept their personal history while taking responsibility for their current choices. They acknowledge their mortality while living fully within temporal bounds. Acceptance without resignation also applies to social and political circumstances. The person in revolt can acknowledge that injustice exists while working to reduce it. They can recognize that institutions are imperfect while participating in efforts to improve them. They can accept that change is difficult while maintaining commitment to values they find important. This practice helps avoid the exhaustion that comes from fighting against unchangeable realities while maintaining the energy needed for constructive action. It creates space for strategic thinking about where effort can be most effective while eliminating the waste of energy on impossible goals. The third practice involves cultivating what might be called ironic engagement, the ability to commit fully to people and projects while maintaining awareness of their temporary and contingent nature. This practice allows for passionate involvement without the anxiety of permanence. Ironic engagement means loving others completely while knowing that all relationships change or end. It means working diligently on projects while accepting that projects may fail or become obsolete. It means supporting causes while recognizing that causes may achieve their goals or reveal their limitations. This practice requires learning to find satisfaction in the quality of engagement rather than in particular outcomes. The person in revolt learns to appreciate the experience of loving rather than demanding that love last forever. They find fulfillment in the process of creating rather than requiring that creations endure. The fourth practice involves developing compassion for the human condition, both in oneself and in others. This compassion emerges from recognizing the difficulty of conscious existence and the courage required simply to continue living when faced with uncertainty, mortality, and meaninglessness. This compassion extends to those whose responses to existence we might question or disapprove. The person in revolt can feel sympathy for religious fundamentalists because they recognize the anxiety that drives the need for certainty. They can understand political extremists because they see the desperation that leads to demands for simple answers to complex questions. This compassion also extends to oneself. The person in revolt learns to forgive their own mistakes, limitations, and failures, while taking responsibility for their choices. They develop patience with their own process of growth and change while maintaining commitment to authenticity and integrity. The fifth practice involves what might be called aesthetic appreciation, the cultivation of sensitivity to beauty in all its forms, including the beauty found in difficulty, complexity, and imperfection. This practice helps develop the capacity to find satisfaction in existence itself rather than in particular achievements or circumstances. Aesthetic appreciation can be developed through attention to natural beauty, sunsets, landscapes, weather patterns, plants, and animals. It can be cultivated through engagement with human creativity, art, music, literature, and architecture. It can be found in the patterns of social interaction, the rhythms of daily life, and the complexity of human personality. Most importantly, aesthetic appreciation involves learning to see consciousness itself as beautiful, to appreciate the remarkable fact that matter has organized itself in such a way as to become aware of itself and capable of experiencing beauty, meaning, and love. 13th conclusion, the affirmation of existence. The journey through absurdity toward revolt represents one of the most profound transformations available to human consciousness. It involves abandoning the most cherished human illusion, the belief that existence must have ultimate meaning to be valuable, and discovering that this abandonment leads not to despair but to a deeper and more authentic engagement with life. This transformation cannot be achieved through intellectual understanding alone. It requires lived experience of meaninglessness, the courage to face that experience without flinching, and the commitment to continue living fully despite the absence of cosmic justification. It demands what might be called existential maturity, the ability to find satisfaction in existence itself, rather than in existence as a means to some imagined end. The person who completes this journey discovers something remarkable, that consciousness capable of recognizing its own cosmic insignificance is also consciousness capable of the most profound beauty, creativity, and love. The very capacities that make us aware of meaninglessness also make us capable of creating temporary islands of meaning in an ocean of indifference. This discovery transforms suffering from meaningless torment into tragic beauty. It transforms relationships from desperate attempts to escape isolation into free gifts of connection. It transforms work from obligation to serve external purposes into opportunity for creative expression. It transforms political engagement from demand for perfect justice into commitment to reduce unnecessary suffering. Most importantly, this transformation reveals that the question, "Why should I continue living?" contains its own answer. The very fact that consciousness has emerged from matter and learned to ask this question represents the most remarkable development in cosmic history. The capacity to wonder about existence, to create beauty, to experience love, and to help others represents justification enough for the temporary adventure of being human. The person in revolt learns to say yes to existence without conditions or guarantees. They embrace the full human condition, its joys and sorrows, its possibilities and limitations, its beauty and its tragedy. They find in this unconditional acceptance a freedom that no external authority can grant and no circumstance can remove. This freedom is not freedom from the human condition, but freedom within it. It is not freedom from mortality, but freedom to live fully within mortal bounds. It is not freedom from uncertainty, but freedom to act decisively despite uncertainty. It is not freedom from suffering, but freedom to find meaning in the experience of suffering. The revolt against absurdity thus becomes the ultimate affirmation of existence. It says yes to life not because life serves some cosmic purpose, but because consciousness itself is precious, temporary, and worthy of celebration. It finds in the very fact of existing consciously in an unconscious universe reason enough for gratitude, wonder, and commitment. This affirmation echoes across all human experience. It can be found in the parent who loves their child without believing that love serves some ultimate purpose. It appears in the artist who creates beauty without expecting their work to last forever. It emerges in the activist who fights injustice without believing that justice is cosmically guaranteed. It manifests in the teacher who shares knowledge without believing that knowledge provides ultimate truth. It shows itself in the friend who offers support without believing that friendship eliminates isolation. It reveals itself in the lover who commits to relationship without believing that love conquers all. In each case, the action is self-justifying rather than instrumentally valuable. It emerges from the immediate experience of being human rather than from abstract beliefs about what humanity should accomplish. It represents the full flowering of consciousness, aware of its own limits, yet committed to expressing itself as completely as possible within those limits. The revolt against absurdity thus becomes not a rejection of the human condition, but its ultimate embrace. It finds in the very impossibility of human existence the emergence of consciousness from matter, the capacity for beauty in an indifferent universe, the possibility of love in the face of mortality, reason enough for celebration. This celebration does not require optimism about the future or faith in ultimate meaning. It requires only recognition that consciousness exists, that it has emerged from cosmic indifference, and that it represents the most remarkable development in the history of the universe. The fact that this consciousness is temporary makes it more precious, not less. The fact that it may be unique makes it more valuable, not less. The fact that it serves no cosmic purpose makes it more worthy of protection and celebration, not less. The person in revolt thus achieves what might be called groundless joy, satisfaction that requires no external justification, beauty that depends on no ultimate purpose, love that serves no cosmic plan. They discover that consciousness capable of recognizing its own cosmic insignificance is also consciousness capable of the most profound significance. Not cosmic significance, but human significance, which is the only kind of significance that conscious beings can actually experience. In this discovery, the question that began this journey, "What's the point?" reveals its own answer. The point is not something existence serves, but something existence creates. The point is not a destination toward which life moves, but the quality of attention we bring to the journey itself. The point is not meaning we discover, but meaning we create through the very act of living consciously in an unconscious universe. The revolt against absurdity thus becomes the ultimate human achievement, not because it serves some cosmic purpose, but because it represents the full flowering of human consciousness, aware of its own nature and committed to expressing that nature as completely as possible within the bounds of mortality. It is the courage to be human without apology, to exist without justification, and to find in the very impossibility of human existence reason enough for gratitude, wonder, and love. This is the gift my grandmother gave me in her final words, not the comfort of false hope, but the courage of authentic existence. Not the promise of ultimate meaning, but the invitation to find meaning in the immediate experience of being conscious in a universe that permits consciousness to emerge. Not the guarantee of cosmic significance, but the recognition that consciousness itself is significant enough to justify the temporary adventure of being human. The revolt against absurdity is thus not a philosophical position, but a way of living. A commitment to existence that requires no external authorization, no cosmic permission, no ultimate justification. It is the courage to be human in the fullest sense, to embrace the complete human condition, and to find in that embrace reason enough for celebration. In the end, we discover that the weight of nothing is not crushing, but liberating. When we stop demanding that existence serve some purpose beyond itself, we become free to appreciate existence as it actually is, temporary, uncertain, often difficult, but also beautiful, creative, and capable of love. We learn to live not because life has ultimate meaning, but because consciousness capable of recognizing meaninglessness is also consciousness capable of the most profound beauty, creativity, and connection. This is the ultimate revolt, to say yes to existence without conditions, to embrace the human condition completely, and to find in that embrace not cosmic significance, but human significance, which is the only kind of significance that matters to conscious beings capable of experiencing it. The revolt against absurdity thus becomes the ultimate affirmation of life, not as it should be, but as it is, magnificent in its impossibility, precious in its temporality, and worthy of celebration simply because it exists at all.